She is a certified yoga instructor. Janet is the founder of Spectrum LifeWorks, a company that provides stress management and wellness programs. She has presented for hundreds of groups and helped thousands of individuals reduce their levels of stress and optimize their health. Janet is the mother of 3, a nurse, and an entrepreneur. She believes that balancing the stress of our lives is key to living a healthy, happy life. May I welcome Janet Fontana.
Thank you. Oops, little spill there. It was April 24th, 1994. When I woke up that morning, I had no idea that that day was going to bring about a big change in my life. I got my kids up and out to preschool, kindergarten, and first grade, and then I headed into Boston to see an allergist who I had seen a few months earlier. My seasonal allergies had started to become year-round, and I also noticed that they were especially bad by the end of a shift working as a nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital. When I went to the allergist, I told him about a couple of times when my voice got hoarse and my chest got tight. Once when I was at a kid's birthday party, and another time when my kids were playing with those big, huge blow-up punching balls. Well, after hearing about these new reactions, looking at my breathing test and my blood work, the allergist said to me, "You have a very high level sensitivity to latex, and you have to be very careful to avoid any exposure at all." Well, I was scheduled to work 3 to 11 the next day, so I said to the allergist, "No problem, I'll just stop and buy some vinyl gloves before I get into work." "No," he said, "you've had a couple of near anaphylactic reactions with throat swelling and difficulty breathing. You cannot take the chance of being in an environment where other people are using latex gloves. You can no longer work in any type of a clinical setting. You can no longer work as a hospital nurse." Even though it's been 14 years now, I can still remember being in that allergist's office in total shock. I could not believe that someone was telling me that I could no longer do the only work that I had ever known, the work that I loved. It took a while for it to sink in, and then, as you would expect, after a short time, I started to feel very sad. I felt angry. I felt resentful that this part of my life was taken away from me. And I also started having a lot of health problems. Because my body was in such a reactive place, I started developing sensitivities to everyday chemicals, to perfumes, to car exhaust, to cleaning products. I started having a lot of headaches, joint pains, fatigue. In the previous year, I had several sinus infections and a couple episodes of bronchitis. So I felt like not only could I not work as a nurse, but my health at 33 years old then was spiraling downward. Now this experience led me to look at health and healing, how stress, how thoughts, emotions, our mental attitude really affect our health overall, our ability to get through life's challenges, and our level of happiness. What I'm going to share with you, and you'll be happy to know, I'm not going to have you doing yoga stretches or walking around the room moving. I've specially picked certain strategies that you can integrate into your day, anytime, any place. I know you're all busy. You have busy lives. I'm not going to tell you to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and practice yoga, come home every day after work and exercise for an hour. Try to make all your meals from whole foods. While those strategies are great, I recognize that you're probably too busy to try to integrate all of that into your life. And it's likely that if I told you that, how long do you think you'd actually implement those changes? Maybe a couple days, maybe not at all. We live in a very fast-paced society, to the point where we can often feel squeezed out of our own lives, that we lose touch with what really brings happiness and meaning into our lives. Now, we need some stress. If you didn't have any stress, you probably wouldn't be very productive, you wouldn't be very creative, you wouldn't be very good at problem solving. When your stress level is low, so too is your level of productivity. Then you get up to the peak where your stress level goes up and you're at your peak. You're creative, you're performing well, you're very productive. Then what happens is you get a little more stressed and you start sliding down the backside of that hill. And that's where many people are. We're not as creative, we're not doing problem solving as well, we're not taking as good a care of ourselves. And that's pretty much where I was when I left my job as a hospital nurse. And I'll tell you a little story to kind of give you an insight of where I was in my life at that time. Over to my left is my daughter Lindsay. She's now 20 years old. When she was 3 years old, we were going to a mother-daughter movement class. Now, I had my son who was 5 and my other daughter who was only about 1.5 years old. And one day they said to the kids, imagine that this whole room is a grocery store and you can buy anything that you want. So imagine all these little 2.5 to 3-year-olds with their ponytails, and they gave them little plastic shopping baskets, and they turned on some fun music, and the kids went jumping and skipping and running around pretending to collect food to put in their little basket. Well, my daughter Lindsay came running up towards me and she said, look, Mama, I bought macaroni and cheese. And I said, oh, wow, let me see. And as she went whizzing past me, she said, no, I'm in a hurry. Where do you think she was learning that from? Now, you could say her father. That would have been nice. But I recognize for myself that that was where I was then. I was in a harried way of being. You don't need to be constantly holding stress. Unfortunately, many times what happens is we get sort of used to carrying stress around. Our mind is going a mile a minute, our bodies are tense and tight. My sister Paula has a daughter who has Williams syndrome. It's a form of mental retardation. And when Courtney was first born, maybe about 1.5 years, she was diagnosed. Well, when she was 3, 4, 5 years old, Paula needed to be on guard all the time. She needed constant attention because one of the characteristics of these children is that they're very social and chattery. So she could easily walk up to someone in a store or out the front door. You know, you had to constantly keep your eye on her. But what happened is that became her way, Paula's way of being. So she had a really hard time even sitting down and enjoying a cup of tea without feeling like she had to jump up and start wiping off countertops and doing something. We have moments in our days when we can relax and let go, clear our minds. And the strategies that I'm going to introduce to you today are going to help you to do that, so that you can integrate these practices into your day without taking extra time to try to build them in. So what I'm going to share with you comes from my own personal experience, from the academic programs that I've done since leaving nursing, from current research in the field of mind-body medicine, and also from people like yourselves who have shared their experiences with me. What I hope you'll do is pick 1 or 2 strategies, tools, attitudes that you can make a commitment to start to practice. And you will notice that it will have a dramatic effect on the level of stress that you experience. When I stepped back and took a look at my life, I realized that I wasn't doing a very good job taking care of myself. You all give so much of yourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. You're going to learn many different practices over the next couple of days to help you do your job more productively, more efficiently, more accurately, which is great. But what I want to make sure is that you can still do your job without having it take a toll on your own health and your own level of happiness, so that you can show up in the experiences outside of work that are as equally important to you. You can be there for your friends and your family, for yourself. When I first left work, I felt overwhelmed. My health was spiraling downward. I couldn't work as a nurse. I had no idea what I was going to do professionally. Money was tight because I wasn't making the income that I was making before. One of the things that I did was I started to focus on what I could control. I couldn't control the allergy to latex, the workers' compensation system, some of the health issues, but I could focus on trying to regain some sense of health. So I started exercising more regularly, eating better, taking saunas, taking a lot of vitamins and supplements. Now, when you're feeling really, really stressed and busy, what are some of the first things you stop doing that might have actually helped you to lower your level of stress?
Exercise less.
Exercising.
Eat more.
What's that?
Eat more.
You eat more, right. So some of the activities that we do, we're dropping healthy activities and unfortunately picking up some unhealthy activities when we're particularly stressed. What other things, healthy habits, might you stop doing when you're stressed? Sleeping well. Anybody else? So we have exercising, sleeping well.
Taking a break at work.
Taking a break.
Stop taking a break.
Right. You stop taking a break, you're working through lunch. Exactly. So thinking about those things, I'm not going to go into exercise and nutrition, sleep, but what I want to point out is that if you're not taking care of your basic physical needs, then you are not going to feel as calm and content at peace as you would be. Because there's a hierarchy of needs, and unless you fill your basic needs first, you're not going to feel at ease. So keeping that in mind. So I decided to focus on my health, as I told you, and after about 6 months or so, I started to feel better, at least physically. And then about 9 months after I left the hospital, a woman moved in a few doors down, and when I went to welcome her to the neighborhood, bring over a coffee cake, she showed me a room over her garage where she was going to start teaching yoga classes. Well, I had never even thought about being in a yoga class before, but I was in a pretty stressed out place. So I said to her, "Do you think that yoga would help me in dealing with this situation?" And she said that she thought that it would. Of course, that's what she would say. Well, I wasn't sure, but at almost 60 years old, this woman did not look a day over 42. So I thought, heck, if this is what it's doing for her, I'm going to give it a try. So I signed up for 6 weeks of classes, and fortunately I did, because if I'd only signed up for 1 or 2 classes, I probably never would have gone back. When I was sitting there on the floor, cross-legged, my back was killing me, my feet were all pins and needles, and all I wanted to do was get home. But fortunately, I stuck with it, and I learned a lot from the practice of yoga. One of the most important things that I learned about myself is that I wasn't breathing correctly. And in fact, the way that I was breathing was actually making me feel more stressed and anxious. There's a very strong connection between how you breathe and how much tension you carry in your physical body and how fast your mind goes. The faster you breathe, the faster those thoughts run through your mind. And unfortunately, many of those thoughts are negative and anxious. What I'd like you to do is bring out an arm, it doesn't matter which, right or left, and squeeze it into a fist. Squeeze your hand as tight as you can. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Even tighter. Keep your fist squeezed tight, and now notice how you're breathing. Or not. Relax your arm down. How many of you were holding your breath? Okay, if you weren't holding your breath, you were probably breathing short and shallowly in your upper chest. When we carry tension in our physical bodies or worry in our minds, it changes the way that we breathe. So I asked you to consciously create tension in your body. But during the day, as you're running from one thing to another, you're trying to keep up with phone calls and emails, getting all of your reports done, if you start accumulating that stress in your body, in your back, in your neck, in your shoulders, your digestive system gets a little irritated, all of those things will affect how you breathe. You'll start breathing in a more stressful way. Now, who can describe for me, where do you notice movement in a baby's body when they breathe? Right, it's in the stomach. That is how we were all born breathing. Most likely, many of you are breathing now in your upper chest, not down into the bases of your lungs. Try just for a minute taking a deep breath in and see where you notice the movement. If you want to kind of put your hands on your lower abdominal area, you can do that. And take a deep breath in and blow it out. Now, if when you take a deep breath in, your shoulders go up, you know that you're not breathing correctly. And when I was first in yoga classes, the instructor, Fran, would describe the process of breathing. As you inhale, feel your belly coming forward. And as you exhale, feel your belly contracting back. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's teaching us how to breathe backwards. I was the one breathing incorrectly. This is what it looked like when I took a deep breath. My shoulders went up and my belly pulled in tight. Now, when the diaphragm is locked up tight, all of the air needs to move in the upper part of your chest. You can't take a full, deep, relaxing breath when you're feeling tense. If you think about the shape of the lungs, they're much smaller at the top, larger at the bases. If you're only moving air at the very top of your lungs, you're not getting a lot of air circulating, you're not moving a lot of oxygen, and your body is going to feel more tense. There's a connection between the anxious thoughts that we carry in our minds and breathing. So when you're feeling anxious, when you're carrying physical tension in your body, it's likely that it's changing the way that you breathe. The more that you can tune into that and pay attention to that throughout your day, the more you'll be able to lower your level of stress. Letting go of any tension you're carrying in your physical body and quieting any anxious thoughts. Fortunately, the breath is both part of the voluntary nervous system and the involuntary nervous system. So you don't need to think about breathing, it will automatically happen. But you can, in fact, control your breath. You can hold it, you can speed it up, you can slow it down. And when you slow down your breath, get it deep into the bases of the lungs, so that's when you feel your belly coming forward on the inhale and back on the exhale, you are then calming your nervous system. It is the only bodily function that gives you access to your nervous system. Now, if you had a really difficult day at work, or maybe a tough day over the weekend, and you went up to a quiet place and you just focused on the flow of your breath and you took some abdominal breaths, how long do you think it would be before your heart rate and your blood pressure came back down to their baseline?
3 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Good guess. Or unless you maybe already knew that. It doesn't take a long time, but it does take awareness. And it makes sense. If you were in a stressful situation, if you were actually running from some wild animal, that's not the time that your body's going to say, hey, hang on, let me just take a deep, slow releasing breath here. No, you're going to get thrown right into that stress cycle. Your heart rate's going up, your blood pressure's going up, and your muscles are getting tense. So it's about awareness. Now, it's difficult to tell how you're breathing, most difficult when you're standing. It gets a little bit easier when you're sitting, and then it's easiest when you're lying down. So I encourage you to take a couple of minutes each night before you fall asleep. Just lie on your back, put your hands against your belly, and notice how you're breathing. How do you think we breathe at night? In our chest or in our bellies? When we sleep, right. The breath shifts down into the bases of our lungs. Now, it's called abdominal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing. Obviously, you're not literally breathing into your belly, but when you expand the bases of the lungs and the diaphragm moves down, it pushes the diaphragm, the belly out slightly. So that's why sometimes in a yoga class or a Tai Chi class, they'll call it belly breathing. We all breathe abdominally, like we were when we were babies. Why do you think it's different during the day than at night? Yep. Your mind, yeah. Right. The stress of your mind causes your breath to change during the day. Once your mind gets out of the way at night, your body goes back to breathing in the most effective, efficient way that it can. So it's a tool that you have with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It can be 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't fall back to sleep. You can be stuck in traffic. You can be on the phone with somebody and be able to practice the abdominal breathing. Now, don't wait until you're in the middle of a heated conversation. till you're sitting in the doctor's office for 45 minutes getting pissed off that he's running so late, or right after your daughter slams her bedroom door in your face. Because I bet that that's not going to be your first reaction, is to just take some deep breaths. Try it when you're relatively relaxed, and it will work for you in those other stressful situations. So remember to breathe. It is the tool that you have most readily available to you. So through yoga, I learned that I wasn't breathing correctly, and that was a tool that I could start to use, and I did start to feel better. And through the breath work, through the movement, through the meditation, I started to feel a release of some of the anger and the sadness and the resentment that I had. When we don't process thoughts and emotions, they live inside of our physical bodies. They create tension, they create illness, they create disease. So I was able to start to process some of that. And it became much clearer to me just how greatly our thoughts, our emotions, our mental attitude really do have an effect on our health and also on our well-being. As Wayne Dyer says, your circumstances have very little to do with your fulfillment, but your attitude towards your circumstances makes all the difference in the world. So even though my life circumstances hadn't changed, I was still out of work, I still had many health issues, my attitude started to shift. And it was really because I started to pay more attention to my thoughts and my emotions, and I was starting to learn how to process them and let them go. I really wanted to learn more about this area, and I wanted to find a way to work with other people, get back to helping people. So I decided to get my master's degree in health education. I also became certified as a yoga instructor, and I did some clinical training programs in mind-body medicine through Harvard Medical School. And through those programs, I learned some pretty interesting statistics about stress. Certainly, I had known that stress was having a big impact on my health and my happiness. But what I learned was really pretty amazing. As many as 90% of all visits to primary care physicians are related to stress. As many as 90%. So if you have diabetes, asthma, digestive issues, any kind of pain, arthritis, anxiety, depression, all of those conditions are exacerbated by stress. How many times a day do you think the average person has one of these surges of adrenaline that kick on the fight or flight response? What's that? 10? Higher than that? More than 10? More than 20? 50 times a day. On average, 50 times a day. That's a few times in every waking hour. What do you think for the average working person is the very first trigger to the stress response? Causing your heart rate to go up a little, adrenaline to start? The alarm clock, you've got it. The alarm clock, exactly. Now, if it was just the alarm clock went off, and you have that little startle because, oh, something just woke me up, and then you were okay, you were happy, you got up and you did your thing, well, your heart rate would go up and your blood pressure would go up, but then very quickly it would come back down again. Just like when you go on a roller coaster. How many of you like to ride roller coasters, but you get a little bit nervous doing it? Okay. When you're on the roller coaster, you're carrying a certain amount of physical tension. You might be a little bit nervous. You're kind of excited. But what happens very shortly after you get off of the roller coaster and start walking around the park? Do you still feel that nervous energy? It very quickly comes down once you get yourself back in what you can perceive to be a safe place. But if it's a rainy Monday morning, what do you think your first thought is when that alarm clock goes off? So it turns out that it's most of what causes stress for us actually comes from our very own thoughts. When we think something stressful, it can turn on the stress response. And it doesn't even need to be real. Just imagining that a situation is going to turn out a particular way and cause you stress can turn on the fight or flight response. My friend Mary works in an intensive care unit, still at Brigham and Women's Hospital. And one Friday afternoon, her nurse manager left her a voicemail on her home phone and said, "Mary, I'd really like to talk to you, something I need to talk to you about." Well, what do you think Mary thought about all weekend long? Do you think that her inclination was, oh, she probably wants to praise me for doing something well? No, probably not. She was worried that something had happened. She's running back through all the patients she had taken care of, all the interactions that she'd had with families, and she's thinking, I can't imagine what she would want, but of course she had that nervousness about it anyway. It turns out that the nurse manager wanted her advice as to how they could get the staff to work together better. It had nothing to do with anything that Mary had done wrong. But we oftentimes jump ahead and we start imagining scenarios to turn out in a certain way, and it creates stress for us. Paying attention to your thoughts, breaking that cycle. As soon as you have a negative thought, it creates some negative emotion, which then can manifest itself in some way in your physical body. Maybe you're prone to headaches. Maybe you're prone to back pain. Maybe you have irritable bowel syndrome. Maybe you get a little anxious. Maybe you have trouble sleeping. We all have vulnerable areas where the stress will manifest itself if we don't do something about it. So what do you think is the fastest way to break this cycle of stress? It's not having a drink. To breathe. Exactly. As soon as you breathe, you have instantly started to break that cycle. Because most of what causes stress for us isn't what's happening right now. All right, you're here for the next couple of days. Some of you might have, had situations at home that you felt were difficult to leave, or worrying about how the kids are going to manage without me, and are they going to remember to do this and that, or maybe worrying about what might be going in your office while you're away, or what do you need to do when you get back to work, and that all these days out of work are going to cause maybe more stress for you, because you'll have more stuff that you need to do. Whenever you think those thoughts, they can throw you into the stress response. But again, most of what causes stress for us isn't what's happening right now. It's usually something that we're thinking back about, or we're jumping ahead and we're worrying about what might yet come. When I took some clinical training programs, so after I did the basic clinical programs, I took some positive psychology courses through Harvard Medical School. And I learned kind of some scary statistics. The first one has to do with your own thinking. What % of the thoughts that run through the average person's mind would you guess are negative? 90. It's close to that. It's about 85% of what we think in our own minds is negative. Now for some of you that might come as a relief, thinking like, okay, I'm not the only one who has all these negative, anxious, worried thoughts. When people are anxious, suffer from anxiety and depression, virtually all thoughts can become negative because of that cycle. One of the easiest ways, and I just learned this recently, it's difficult to pay attention to your thoughts. I mean, it's hard to like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that. But if you pay attention to how you're feeling, then you'll know whether you have positive thoughts running through your mind or negative thoughts running through your mind. If you're feeling happy, then your thoughts are in a good place. If you're feeling irritated, frustrated, upset, then it's likely that you have negative thoughts because of that cycle. What you think in your mind translates into emotions, which then can affect your physical health. So it's a cycle. The other statistic that I learned has to do with what we say to one another. What percentage of what we say to one another on a good news day, so there hasn't been some big natural disaster, there's not an elevated security alert, what percentage of what we say to one another would you guess is negative? It's very close. It's about 75%. I know. Pay attention. you know, over the next couple of days as you're here, the little casual conversations that you have with people. Oh, isn't it beautiful? Oh my God, it's so hot. I couldn't stand it. Or, you know, we get here and I couldn't even check into my room. All of those little conversations that we have with people. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't share, you know, some of the issues that you're going with people going through and learning from one another. But be careful of the casual conversations that you have with people. You know, are you following them down their stressful place? I oftentimes feel like we're in this competition of who's the most stressed. Because in our society, it's like we relate stress to being important and productive, and you must have a really important job because you're really stressed out. And oftentimes we can get caught up in that, like, oh yeah, well, I have a lot of things going on too, and you know, Stephanie's graduating last week, and then I have my in-laws visiting me, and work has been really crazy. Whenever you think those thoughts, know that you are putting yourself in a stressful place. And is that what you really want to be doing? This is a fun quote I found from the Beverly Hillbillies. Worrying is like rocking in a rocking chair. You're doing something, but you ain't getting nowhere. So pay attention to your thoughts. Use the breath. Again, most of what causes stress isn't what's happening right now. How many of you have ever driven home from someplace, gotten all the way there, and realized you can't remember any part of the drive? Every time. Most everybody can relate to that experience. Where were you? Where were you? Your body was driving the car, but your mind was a million miles away. You were probably thinking back to something that had happened, or most likely you're jumping ahead to what you need to do later, or what might happen later that day or tomorrow. So we're always jumping out of the moment. So, bringing yourself back. What do you think is the best way to bring yourself back to the present moment? Breathing, exactly. Coming back to your breath. Thich Nhat Hanh has written many books on the subject of mindfulness, and he has a beautiful poem that reminds us that the breath is always there for us. And when we know that we're breathing, where is our attention? In what? Past, present, or future? Present. It's in the present. So as soon as you know you're breathing, you're back in the present moment. So Thich Nhat Hanh is a beautiful little quote poem. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Is that nice? Just remind you, coming back to the breath, so that you can take in the experiences of your life. When you're driving home from work, that should be a relatively relaxing time for you. When you're taking a shower in the morning, that should be a pleasurable experience for you. But unfortunately, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, I know I have, honestly, I'm taking a shower and I'm like, did I already wash my hair? What are you most likely doing when you lose yourself like that? You're probably writing out your to-do list of all the many things that you need to do. So we lose experiences. We rob ourselves of experiences that could be pleasurable, that could be relaxing. And one of the ways that I have heard it explained, which really connected for me, was from Joan Bursanko. She was one of the founders of the Mind Body Institute. And what she says, it's about the intention of your attention. So the intention of your attention. Many people have asked me, like, well, yeah, it's nice to be present in the moment, but when do you think about your problems? When do you try to solve situations? When are you able to set goals? It's the intention of your attention. So if you had a difficult situation going on at work and you decided that you were going to come home and go out for a walk and use that time to help get some clarity, to help you think about the situation and how you best want to handle it, it's your intention to use that experience in that way. That's fine. But is it your intention to take your problems to bed with you, in the bathtub with you, out into the garden with you? You want to bring your focus back to the present moment in those experiences that you enjoy. Those are the experiences that are going to most enrich your life, being present in those experiences. I have a visual example of mindfulness. When you see this picture of this little boy looking at the bubbles, do you think he's thinking, oh my gosh, my dad's going to be so mad at me, I never did pick up those Legos? No. Do you think he's upset because his friend didn't play with him on the playground? No, he's completely absorbed in the moment. This is how we want to live our life, so that we're present in the experiences of our lives. So when you do have an opportunity to have some free time for yourself, to work out in your garden, to go out to dinner with a friend, to go to a movie, to take a walk, to play with your kids, your pet, you're in those experiences. You're not taking all of your work stuff and all the other parts of your life into those experiences with you. As John Lennon once said, life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. We unknowingly rob ourselves of what could be pleasurable, relaxing experiences. So remembering the intention of your attention. And what I suggest to you is that you pick one activity that you do regularly and make a commitment to do it in a mindful way. So if it were to take a shower, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you feel? Opening up your awareness, paying attention to what you're experiencing in that moment. And whenever you notice that your mind is thinking about something else, first of all, breathe. That'll instantly bring you back to the present moment. And then notice what you were thinking about. It's probably just some planning or some thinking that you don't even need to be addressing right now. I heard recently that psychologists believe that 99% of our thoughts are repetitive and useless. 99%. Because we rehash all the same stuff over and over and over again. So mindfulness simply is knowing what you are doing while you are doing it. So it's simply about paying attention. Researchers are now looking at the population in our society who have a lot of stressful stuff going on, just like you and I, but they aren't as affected by stress in terms of their health, their happiness, their level of optimism. They are somehow more resilient. And we're trying to learn from that population to help the masses of people who are really stressed out. So what researchers have found, let me jump back one else, oops, save that, is that, as you would expect, positive emotions are good for our health. Okay, there was a study, and they believe it or not, just recently figuring this stuff out. For years and years, we have known that anger, resentment, guilt, grief can negatively affect our health and our happiness. What we haven't known and haven't done nearly as many studies in is, what about positive emotions? What about love, gratitude, compassion, forgiveness? Well, it turns out that those emotions are very good for our health, our happiness, and they even help us to live longer lives. Back in 1932, 178 nuns graduated from a training program, and they were about to go out onto their missions. And they were asked at that time to write a brief paragraph of how they felt at this very momentous occasion. Later, the researchers looked at the writings and they categorized them into 4 different quartiles. from the happiest nuns to the least happy nuns. And then they followed their lifespan. Now, it's very hard to separate factors that could affect our level of happiness and our health and our lifespan. But these nuns, if you think about it, similar belief systems, same medical care, same bland diet. So they had very similar lives. A lot of factors that could have affected their longevity were controlled for. Well, at the age of 85, when the researchers looked at the writings, when each nun turned 85, 94% of the nuns in the happiest group were still alive, versus only 34% of the least happy. And at age 90, 54% of the happiest were still alive, versus only 11% of the least cheerful. So it had a dramatic difference. Over half of the most cheerful was still alive at 90 years old, versus only 11% of the least. Now, I've had people in one audience, a woman, say to me, well, I had the most narcissistic grandmother ever, and she lived to 102 years old. There's many different factors. Certainly, we're not saying that nutrition and exercise and health care and all of those things that we need to stay healthy aren't factors. But what we are discovering that so too are positive emotions. So when you feel happier, it's having a positive effect on your physical health. You're less likely to get ill, to use the healthcare system, and you're more likely to live a longer, healthier life. So when the researchers came up with these numbers, they were like, we can't believe this. There must be something else to this. So they went back through the data. They looked at intelligence. They looked at sun exposure. They looked at all different kinds of things. But the only thing that they could come back to was the fact that these nuns who lived longer had truly expressed more positive emotions. They seemed to be happier, more optimistic people. So they came back to the fact that it was the positive emotions that made these nuns happy. And here are our happy nuns now. Actually, these aren't the real nuns. These are nuns I found online, but they looked happy. So you might be wondering, well, how do I get there? How do I feel happier? How do I bring more happiness into my life? Well, what researchers are finding is that the people who are most content and most satisfied with their lives fill their lives that begin with activities that start with the letter P. First of all, pleasure, passion, and purpose. So they fill their lives with activities that they enjoy. When they're engaged in that activity, by passion, what we really mean is that whole concept of being in the moment, the mindfulness. And then purpose. Many of the activities that they engage in help them to feel like they're contributing. There's a higher purpose, a greater sense of meaning in the activities that they're engaging in. Now, I'm not saying that everything that they do fits into all three of these. But if you can pick activities that you enjoy doing, that also, when you're doing them, you're totally absorbed in that moment, and you feel like you're making a difference, then it's going to be much more beneficial to you. It's going to lower your level of stress, and it's going to raise your level of happiness. Now, we all think that certain things, making more money, working less hours, paying off our bills, are going to make us happy. But researchers have found that those external events have very little effect on our long-term happiness. Yes, for a little while you might be happier after a pay raise or things, buying a house or any positive event in your life. But we adapt to that change. And then our minds look for more. What's next? What's the next good thing that can happen for me? But if you can fill your life with activities that bring you pleasure, passion, and purpose, it will raise your level of happiness. We all have a baseline level of happiness where we tend to fall back to. When either good things happen in our lives, we come back down. Bad things happen in our lives, we adapt to that too, and we come back to a baseline. Filling your life with activities that are meaningful to you will help to raise your level of happiness. Now, I could tell you to go for a walk in the woods, to watch funny movies, to hang out with funny people, but it really depends on what you like to do. What brings you pleasure, passion, and purpose? What I'd like you to do is write down 2 or 3 activities that you find that you know help to lower your level of stress and raise your level of happiness. So writing down a couple of activities.